Well, hello there. Have you ever wondered why some artists are able to capture the delicacy and fragility of a rose while others never seem to be able to get there? In this video, I am going to attempt to answer this question. It is not the paint nor the materials that really affect the results, but rather the approach we take and how we feel about our subject. In this video, I am going to paint a rose using the indirect method. For time constraints, in this video there will be only 2 painting sessions or 2 layers, but several more layers could be introduced for even more subtlety and delicacy. The colors that we are going to be using are going to be titanium white, Naples yellow light, rose sienna, quinacridone gold brown. That could be substitute for transparent oxide red or Williams Winsor Newton burnt sienna, Winsor Newton raw umber, Michael Hardin permanent orange, Gamblin perylene red, Michael Hardin amethyst, French ultramarine Winsor Newton, but any French ultramarine probably will do, Viridian from Gamblin, but any Viridian will do, Winsor yellow by Winsor Newton, but pretty much any lemon yellow that you have will do, and ivory black by Winsor Newton. Colors that we're going to be using for the background or the wash of the canvas is going to be quinacridone gold brown by Williamsburg, Michael Hardin amethyst, and ivory black by Winsor Newton. The first thing that I do is I dip my brush in Gamsol, a little bit of ivory black on one corner, amethyst, and the gold brown in the other corner. So I'll spray it, smooth it up a little bit. I'm gonna get these paper towels. I'm gonna wipe this down. Okay, looks pretty good. The next thing that I did, I normally don't do the grid, but I decided to do it this time because I really want to make sure that this rose is the same shape, because I like the whole thing. I don't want to make any alterations if I can avoid it. I made a grid on the photo and I made a grid on the panel. Now it's going to be a little bit more tricky because if you notice, the panel is oval, so it's not going to be exact, but I want to make sure that everything is in the ballpark of what it's supposed to be. And the way I made the lines is, obviously in here I use a Sharpie. I use this Sharpie. You can use anything you want, but it has to glide on it because I put a plastic cover in it to protect the photo, because I will take this plastic cover once I start painting and I don't want to have to print another one. But for the canvas, I use a cotton swab, and what I did is I applied the ruler and I went with the cotton swab just to lift the paint. I don't want to add paint to this, I just want to lift it because I wanted to be the grid as subtle as possible so I don't get too overwhelmed and too distracted with the lines. So now this is ready for the drawing. The first thing that I do is I start with the contour of the rose. I grab a fairly small bristle brush and I work my way around the rose. And the reason why I do that is because shorter distances are much easier to judge than longer distances. So I'm judging just from the outside of the rose to the outside or the contour of the canvas, and that's a shorter distance that if I were to just start from the middle of the rose. And once I have the rose placement pretty good, then I start working on the foliage and the stem. Since I have a grid, I usually don't do the grid, but because this is an oval, it was a little tricky and I really wanted to get the shape fairly accurate. Since I have the grid, it was fairly quick to be able to get everything in place, but if I'm not using a grid, this stage usually will take me much longer. Obviously, for economy of reasons, I am also speeding up this video, so I don't want to speed it up too much. It's only 2x to give you a pretty good idea about what I am doing, but I've eliminated all the periods in which obviously I'm not painting to make it more interesting and hopefully a little bit less boring. So now I'm working on the middle of the rose, and that's my favorite part, because the middle of the rose, where the warmest and the reddest area will be, is really the area that commands the most attention, and it should be treated as such. Once I have the perimeter of the rose completed and everything pretty much drawn in the way I wanted to, the next thing I do is massing out things, and I apply the darkest tones that I see fairly loose with a bristle brush. And it's important that you use the bristle brush because bristle brushes are pretty strong. They're made of hog hair and they take a lot of beating, and they're great for scrubbing and pushing paint around. If you were to use a regular synthetic or natural brush for that, you will literally destroy the brush. So I continue putting the darkest values there, and that's the first thing I do, the darkest darks. And after that, then I start lifting a little bit of the paint, because the paint and the background is a little wet, and it's wet enough for me to do that. I lift the paint up with a cotton swab for the lightest areas that I see. So once I have the lightest lights and the darkest darks, then it really helps me see the overall composition and the overall painting. And if you find yourself to whether it's difficult to lift enough, like I've done here in several passages, all you have to do is dip the cotton swab a little bit in Gamsol or odorless mineral spirits, or sometimes a little bit of oil or medium, depending on what you're using. You apply a little bit of that, and then the paint will be lifted. In other areas, I lift it with a little paper towel or cloth, and I wrap it around my finger. And I continue playing around with the brush, spreading things around. I'm working on the middle values now. And back and forth, I continue to do it until I really like what I see, and I feel that the rose is finally ready to take on the paint. And after I complete that, then I get a very soft comb brush, and then I wipe everything a little bit so there are absolutely no ridges. And the last thing I do is, with my little pinky, I smooth things around a little bit to eliminate whatever lines I might see. Here are the colors I'm going to be using. I have added burnt umber when I printed the photo, because I realized the burnt umber turns down the reds beautifully. So I have added burnt umber, and I have added King's Blue by Williamsburg, because I only use it a tiny bit in the end in the background, but it really makes the background come alive. And I have also added a little bit of white to a little bit of all of the colors in here to make the tints, because this really allows you to see the color. Once you add a little bit of white, you can really see what you have, and it makes painting much easier. Now right here I have black and this yellow. That is Winsor yellow. It's very transparent and it leans towards lemon. So I made an olive green, and I added white to make the toned down, gray down version of the olive green. This is just pure black. This is Viridian with a little black to make it darker. This is just Viridian. And right here I have 9 value scale stones because there's going to be 9 values throughout the painting, so I make 9. So now we're getting ready with this palette. We're getting ready to make the colors. After I've made all my colors, then when I'm getting ready to paint, the first thing I do is I oil out the board, which means is I apply a thin layer of linseed oil with a brush, a very soft brush, and then I wipe that twice with paper towel, one in a vertical motion and another one in a horizontal motion. And the reason why I do that is so the board will stay nice and wet and the colors will blend together seamlessly a lot easier. Then after that, I start laying on the background colors, and I like to begin with a negative shape that connects the rose with the leaves, because that is a very important space. It has a little bit of the colors of the leaves, a little bit of the colors of the rose, and the overall colors of the background, which are going to be gray, because I start with the gray value. If you notice previously the way I was making the colors for the background, I started with the value gray that I wanted, and then to the value gray I added the colors of the rose, a little bit of the magenta, the pink, a little bit of the rosienna from the yellows, a little bit of the Michael Harden permanent orange, and a little bit of the green, of course, from the leaves, until I end up with a very neutral gray down bluish green. And I make sure by looking at the value finder or the red filter that is exactly the right value. I do that throughout the painting, checking the values constantly. So after I have that, then I start working on the leaves, and I use my darkest green that, if you remember, I made it with ivory black, and the Windsor lemon, Windsor yellow, and I added a little bit of the magenta to tone it down, but overall it's just basically black and yellow. I want those greens to be subdued. And then the lighter leaf that is a little bit brighter, that one has a touch of viridian and a little bit more yellow, because it needs to be a little lighter and it's faded into the background. So I don't want it to be as dark and command as much attention as the leaf underneath. I continue working on the background, and now I start at the top, and I purposefully making it darker because I want the light of the rose at the top to contrast nicely with the background. I don't want to be too drastic. I do not want to make the background too dark, because then the rose will be too garish, and I wanted to have an airy feel to it. So it's much easier to do it in stages. And notice that I'm using an angular soft brush, and at the ends of the canvas I am a lot thinner, and the reason is I want the canvas color, that warmth orange, rich orange, to come out and peek through the canvas, especially at the ends of it, to make it a little bit more of an antiquish, vintage is the word I'm looking for, effect. And now I'm working on the bottom part, and the bottom part is substantially lighter. Now you can see it in this posterized photo that I had, and I made it with Chroma Magic, how all the colors are separated, and you can see the purples, very subtle purples, and how it's much lighter from the bottom. When I lightened that photograph, I used a north light window, and the light was coming primarily from the left, but from the bottom of it, and that is why it's so much lighter at the bottom. And I love that, because it gives the rose, it makes it look like the rose is lifted towards the heavens, and it gave it a little soulful look, and that was exactly what I was looking for. Usually it takes me quite a while to set things up, even a single rose, because I'm looking for the right tilt and looking for the right angle, for the right look, for the right colors to pick through, and sometimes the light is not quite right. I favor north light, and I always place all all my subjects by that north light window that I have in the studio. It's a very small window, but it does the job nicely. After I've put all the colors of the background, then the next thing that I do is I grab a filbert brush, a soft filbert brush, and I tied all the strokes together, but I'm going very gently with it. Right now I'm actually using a hog brush, and the reason why I'm using the hog brush or the Bristol brush is because I really want to lift the color, and I want to lift the color to reveal the warmth and the orange of the background, because that balance the coolness and the blues really nicely. So I'm very soft. I'm lifting the color very softly. In some areas I'll leave it a little thicker, the areas that I want a little bit more cool and more blue, and the areas that I want it to be more smoky and more loose, then I leave the colors more. After I completed the background and I like what I see, then I continue working with the leaves to make sure that I get the overall value and the overall tones that I see. And I'm using an angle soft brush for that. I don't usually use angle brushes. I usually just use flats or filberts. And the reason why I decided to use the angle brush for this is because roses have a lot of angles to them, and the delicacy of the brush coming to a point, it really lends itself towards the shapes that I see overall. So I'm making my job a little bit easier if I'm choosing a brush that will work with the form instead of against it. And I'm very gentle. The brush that I'm using is a medium size, and I keep going and putting some of the colors of the leaves, the greens in the background, to tie together, because remember, painting is one step forward, two steps back, and so forth, and as above so below, and so forth, which means anytime that I apply one color to one area, I also need to apply it somewhere else to unify the whole thing. And if I don't apply some of the green into the background, then the blue will not be harmonized. The background will be too cool, and it will be completely alienated from the rose and the foliage. And I want to achieve a feeling of unity and harmony. I'm working on the bottom of the leaves, and I want the bottom of the leaves to be very soft and almost blending into the background, because I do not want the attention at all to go to the bottom of the rose. Therefore, the only prominent leaves will be the top of the bottom, and not even the top right one, but the bottom right one, the darkest leaf. That's the one that I want to command the most attention. Therefore, I'm making sure that the background colors are blended into the leaves very carefully. After all the foliage and the background is completed, then it's time for me to begin with the rose. Now I began with the bottom petal, and the reason why I do that is because quite simply is the easiest one. The shape is the easiest one, and I see the colors more defined. Now I'm going to check my colors throughout with the holly, And it's interesting that at first I'm going to have to make a lot of adjustments because the eyes take a while to adjust. And the more you paint, the more you see, and the easier it is to figure out the values. Also, you don't see this in this painting because there's a lot of editing going on, but there is a lot of periods in which I was not painting. I was just staring at the rose. Many minutes were just staring at the rose to trying to figure out the colors, and also breaks, just going outside for 2-3 minutes to clear my eyes and to see into the horizon. So when I came back, then I was able to see the colors more clearly, because this is like a labyrinth. There's just so many tones, and I'm using the posterized photo, so it can quite literally drive you mad if you don't take frequent breaks and try to do one thing at a time. So by trying to stick to one petal at a time or one color combination at a time, I make the job much easier. And I know that at first the colors seem quite light. Like if you're comparing my painting with the photo, it's like, whoa, it looks so stark. But the reason why they look so light is because there's no colors around it. I match the colors with the hollies, and really those are the colors of the rose. But because they're not very many colors at the beginning, it's just those lights, and none of the reds of the interior of the rose are there, or the middle tones yet. Everything looks so stark, and you have to trust yourself and trust your eyes that you are going to get there, and don't feel too bad about the fact that the colors don't look quite right. Just trust yourself that you're matching the right colors, and really they are accurate. And the more you paint, after you blend the colors together, that's when you will realize, oh, the colors were right. I just have to be patient to let the shapes and all the values work together as a whole to define the rose. I'm working on the background a little bit more because I really needed to find a place to put my beautiful King's blue. Blue is a complementary of orange, and I want the orange of this flower to come forward, because even though it's a yellow rose, this is a Juliet rose by David Austin. Even though it's yellow on the outside, it's very orange in the inside, but it's not just orange, it's peach orange, it's a pinkish orange, because I don't really like orange per se, but when it leans towards pink, I think it's the most beautiful, delicate color in the planet. So by putting a little bit of that blue in the background, I'm already setting myself up to make sure that that orange comes forward. Now is where insanity starts settling in. All those different little colors. And if you're going to be tempted to abandon the project, it will definitely be at this stage. Every time I enter this stage, I become really, really apprehensive, because everything looks like a mosaic of madness. It looks crazy, all those little tones there, and it appears so daunting that the temptation many times is, what am I doing? I don't think this is gonna work out. I have this beautiful vision in my brain and I don't see it coming. So inevitably it happens in about 98% of the paintings that I make. And I know knowing is half the battle. I know that it's going to happen. So when I hear that voice in my head that is telling me this is insane, it doesn't look right, all those colors together, this is just too complicated, who am I kidding, how can I do this? I quiet that voice. I walk away. I always say, well, this is a perfectly good time to take a break. I don't want to listen to that voice, because I know that it happens every time, and anticipating it is always good, because I know it's going to happen. So when it happens, I just avoid it like a plague. Avoid to listening to it. I let it come, and then I let it go. So it comes from one ear, on one ear it comes, and another it goes. All right, I have blended the colors while you weren't watching, because that takes way too long and I didn't want the video to be too long. So basically what I did is I blended all those tones, and I continue blending more and blending the background, and so you can see that the process is construction, deconstruction, or deconstruction. So it appears that I'm painting or destroying what I painted, but that is not true. It's simply that I don't want to have any edges whatsoever. This is the first stage of the rose. Remember, this is the indirect painting, so we're going to paint the rose first, but then we're going to let it dry and then go over it. So I want the first layer to be really, really soft, nothing defines, and the overall colors there, but all blended nicely into the background to have an atmospheric effect. And I know that it seems like, well, what did I go through all the trouble of putting all the colors in there if I'm just going to blend it all together? What is the point? Well, when I work a la prima, or direct method and only one layer, then I don't do this. Every stroke is the final stroke basically, but those paintings, it will take too long. And you've seen it actually. I have painted a rose. I have posted a video done this way, alla prima, but it has a completely different effect. It's still good, but the painting doesn't end up that atmospheric. Now what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a little sponge and I'm lifting the color underneath from the background, because I want some of the warmth to peek through. And if I try to do that when the paint has dried, I couldn't do it. So this can only be done while the paint is still wet. The background underneath has dried, so I won't be lifting any of the orange. I'll be lifting the blues. And after I do that, then I soften everything with a very, very soft brush, flat brush, to completely eliminate any edges I have. The painting now has dried after 5 days, and since I want this rose to look vintage and ethereal, I may not touch the leaves or only add maybe a little bit of green and darks in some areas, because I want to concentrate most on the petals to try to reach a translucent effect. All right, so this is gonna sound crazy, but basically what I am doing now is exactly the same thing that I did from the beginning. The only difference is that there will be some areas that maybe I don't paint, and some areas I will emphasize by applying more color or less color. But I am proceeding in the same fashion. I'm looking at the posterized photo and I am following all the tones as I see. But this time, notice also that I'm not working on the bottom petal. I'm working on the lightest tones. And I'm doing that because that way they will come forward. I already have the main tones underneath, and by having the main tones underneath, it makes it a lot easier to see the different layers. So basically I have nice middle tones, nothing very, very dark except for maybe that leaf, and some lights there because they need to come forward. But the rest of the paint, I continue applying it in the same fashion as I did at the beginning. I have noticed that 77% of you that watch my videos still haven't subscribed. It will really take a second, and your support will really affect the content of my channel. So please subscribe. It's time to start putting the yellows in the rose. I was holding on to that. I didn't want to put too many or too much at the beginning because it's much easier to start subdued and raise the color vibration or become more chromatic as you advance the painting than the other way around. If you're too bright at the beginning, then toning those colors down are going to be very difficult. And the reason is the brighter colors are usually thicker, and oil painting is fat over lean, meaning the thick colors, which are the light colors, hence the yellows and the whites, are thicker, and the darker colors and the muted colors are thinner. Therefore, at the beginning you want to apply the thinner colors, and in the end you want to apply the thick colors, and this way the painting will not crack. And the reason is, if you apply thick colors on top of thin colors, the thin layer underneath will dry too fast. The opposite. If the color underneath is not thin, if it's too thick, it will take forever to dry, right? It's going to dry faster. But if you apply a layer of thin color on top, that thin color will dry faster. So when it dries fast, the color underneath that hasn't dried yet, as it's drying, will expand, and it will make the paint in the top crack. That is the reason why you really want to obey the rule of fat over lean. I realized that the bottom of the leaves could definitely use a little bit more definition because there was way too much contrast between the top ones and the bottom ones. So even though I want the bottom ones to be a lot more subtle, still I don't like the jump to be so harsh. So I am putting a little bit more darker greens in it and making sure that everything harmonizes. This is the 4th day that I work on this painting, and at this stage I really want to finish. So what I do is I brainstorm for a few minutes to try to figure out the areas that I need to come forward, the areas that I need to push back, and what I want the attention to be. Now, we Westerners, we read from top left to bottom right. So I want my attention to go along these lines of the rose. And the first thing that I notice is this dark over here is way too harsh. My eyes go there. So I definitely need to soften that. And so this edge a little bit is a little too harsh, so I want to soften it. I don't want the attention to come here. But this has lost a curve. It needs to be curved a little bit more, and I want more yellow here because when I painted this rose, I had the roses and I know that it was substantial more yellow all around. So I'm going to put very gently a little bit more yellow in different areas, and I'm going to give some sharp definition to some of the petals to make, and also the background. This is a little too harsh, but I want a little bit more darkness around to make the rose come forward. So let's see what we can do. I would like to take a moment to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.